Language and excuse me. I want to introduce you all to Absolute Language and Literacy Tutoring Services LLCs, Elisar Gray and Ebony Martin, who are amazing tutors for students who struggle with reading. Elisar works for Clayton County Schools and is a graduate of Clayton State University and has a master's and additional training from the University of Phoenix, and has participated in LETRS training, LETRS training, which is the work of Louisa Moats and a couple of other reading researchers to bring to teachers the background information about how reading is acquired in the brain. And Ebony Martin has worked in a metropolitan Atlanta school district for 10 years. She is a Clark Atlanta University graduate and worked with Teach for America before obtaining her master's degree. So welcome, ladies.
Welcome.
Hi, Tina. Thank you.
I'm so delighted that you agreed to join us this evening, and hopefully we'll get more people popping in as we through the link up on the event page. And I do apologize because on my end it tells me that the email went out at 6 o'clock as I had scheduled it, and that's very frustrating. So hopefully people join us as we go along. I'm gonna mute myself so that you all can get started on your presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and share my screen. Elisar, let me know when you can see it.
Yep.
Okay. All right, so we will go right in. So welcome to the Reading Struggle 101. Again, Tina, thank you for having us tonight. It's interesting, we met about a year ago at another dyslexia event, so it's good to see that we can collaborate. All right, so you've done a great job already introducing us. And so here we are. We started Absolute Language and Literacy almost a year ago, but we've been talking about it for probably 3 years now, if not longer. And so here we are. Elisar Gray and I have worked together for about a decade, actually. Elisar, you're gonna go ahead.
Yeah, so just in addition to what Tina already shared, what I'd like to just really emphasize is that this work is birthed out of a love and a passion for children and a passion for literacy. So Ebony and I both know that literacy is not a course, it's not a subject, it's not a class, but it truly is a life skill. And in order for students to have success, not only academically, but personally, they have to have a command over reading, writing, speaking, listening, and thinking. And so we've had the advantage of being able to work in our passion in the K-12 public school sector. And in that role, we've been firsthand up close to some very good things and some things that don't rub us, the right way. And so in an effort to do our most excellent work with children, our business was born. And so tonight you'll hear us really just share and talk about the work that's so near to our heart. So again, thank you for joining us.
All right, thank you. Okay, well, let's go right in. Okay, so we do want to check. We do know a few people who's in the Zoom room. Thank you for joining us. Are you coming as a parent tonight, educator, or advocate? And you can just unmute because there's so few of us and let us know who you are if you choose to, or you can put it in a chat box. Is everyone a parent? Is that why you're here tonight, or are some of you educators?
Hi, I'm Tori St. Germain. I'm a former parent.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth, and I'm a parent.
Oh, I'm sorry. Two people were talking. Okay.
Yep. I stopped. I'm a former educator and a parent of 2 children with special needs, is what I was trying to say for Tori.
All right,
Thank you.
Tori.
Welcome.
Thank you. Someone else was speaking too. All right, and in the chat box,
Hi,
Maya
I
said
was
she's
saying that I'm Elizabeth and I'm a parent.
okay. Elizabeth, I'm so sorry. Every time you talk, someone else talks. You say you're Elizabeth and you're coming as a parent tonight. Thank you. Welcome, Elizabeth. Maya said that parent and educator, and Tawana said she's coming as parent tonight. All right, so we hope that we have some really great information for everyone that is here tonight. Thank you again. So our objectives tonight are, we hope that at the end of our session, you have a greater understanding of dyslexia and how it impacts either the students in your class or your own child or other reading challenges. Gain a better understanding of the factors that contribute to the complexity of teaching reading, and gain some strategies to implement at home when supporting or facilitating reading practice. All right, so let's just start by defining what is dyslexia. But before we dive into that, I do want to play a quick game, or it's a lie or truth. In the game, it's actually going to say myth or truth. So if you're on a computer or a phone, you can play this game. I'm going to drop the link in the chat box. The app is called Quiz Is. You don't need to download it. You just need to click on the link and then I'll give you the code. This is how we're just going to warm up tonight.
And even though we're educators, this is not a pop quiz, so it's not to get you, but it's more so just to talk about the myths that exist. So we know when we hear dyslexia, there's a common myth that everyone thinks of. And believe it or not, there are other pervasive myths about dyslexia. And so we just really want to just get a temperature check. What do you already know? And what do you think about when you hear dyslexia?
All right. So I'm going to go ahead and moderate the quizzes activity. And once we get about 7 people in, maybe 6, we'll go ahead and start the game.
So in the chat box, you'll see where Ebony put the link. All you have to do is just click that link. It'll take you automatically to the Quiz Is site. Once you get there, you'll enter the code 641018.
So far, I have about 3 people. Let's get about 2 more people and we'll go ahead and play it.
When I clicked on the link, it actually opened directly into quizzes. So it went straight into the game. So that was cool.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. So one more person and we'll go ahead and start. You don't have to use your real name either. So it should generate a funny name, but you can really put whatever you want to put. All right. Well, Elisar, I'm going to go ahead and start the game.
All right. Are you able to project the game?
Mm-hmm.
We don't see it.
Okay. I'm sorry, Maya. I think you can still join. Okay. So I'm going to wait for Maya to catch up to us. Let me know when you're in, Maya. All right, Tina. Maya, did you get in? Okay, cool. All right. All right. English makes no sense. This explains why reading is difficult. I imagine what most of you are going to say for this one. All right, 2 more people, 2 more people. All right. So what do you guys think about this? Does English make sense?
I knew that I was going to answer it wrong, but in reality, unless you absolutely study the code of English, no, it doesn't make sense.
Yes, you're
You have
absolutely
to
right.
learn the code.
All right, I'm expecting everyone to get this one right. So there is a timer, so we missed a person or two. So later on tonight, when Elisar talks about how to read with your child, that one should come up. What not to do.
Ebony, this is Maya. Should I not be playing?
Oh, well, I didn't see you in first place, Maya. So yes, you should be playing. Maybe because you missed that first question when we started. All right, let's see where we are. Is EL Maya, is that you?
Yes, that's me. I keep doing it from my phone, so I'm switching back and forth.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay. All right. Third grade is too late. We don't want to wait. So this is absolutely a myth. Okay. All right, just 3 more. Good. Yes, I'm glad that everyone knew that. Yes, 95% of people can learn to read. All right, one more person. Okay. All right, so yes, dyslexia can be hereditary. I remember the one we just had about not waiting until 3rd grade. So now they're saying you can find out very soon. Okay. All right. So let's see. All right. So EL Brandy. Who's Brandy? Okay, Brandy. All right. Welcome, Brandy. All right. So EL was Elisar, right?
Yes.
Okay, so Brandy would be our winner then. Thank you. Thank you everyone for participating. So this was not a quiz. It's not like a I got you moment. It was really just to see what are some common myths that exist around reading and dyslexia.
And hopefully, as we go throughout this presentation, you'll be able to dispel some of the myths with the information that we share tonight.
All right. So the International Dyslexia Association defines dyslexia as such, and I'm not going to read all of this to you. I do want you to notice the things that are in bold font, especially the part about the neurobiological part. You don't get dyslexia because you didn't have books in your house. Doesn't work that way.
And what I like about the emphasis on neurobiological is that a lot of people think of reversals when you think of dyslexia. The first thing that people would say, oh, I know what dyslexia is when you see words backwards or when the letters are switched. And so they always say that, which is a problem in the eye area. So we know that dyslexia originates in the brain.
Yeah, and oftentimes people think it's a vision problem. So vision is usually screened, especially if your child is going through the special education process. Vision is screened for really any child that is going to receive an IEP. But vision and dyslexia are not associated.
So what's really important to know about the definition of dyslexia ultimately is that it, again, originates in the brain, and it's a deficit in the phonological processor. So when we think about students being able to actually lift the word from the page at that basic level of connecting sound to print is where our dyslexic students struggle the most. And so that looks like having trouble lifting the word from the page, or what we call decoding. Students may also have poor spelling abilities. And what's so interesting is that it's an unexpected deficit, because we think about a student who usually could be stronger in other areas. So maybe it's a student who's stronger in math, or maybe they have excellent vocabulary. They speak really well. They have really good art skills. So you wouldn't expect that they would struggle with reading. And what's really important is when we think about the type of instruction that students have received, we know that these students have received effective quality reading instruction. So despite all of their other strengths and the fact that they've received excellent reading instruction, they still continue to struggle. So those are signs that a child might be dyslexic. And of course, if they struggle with lifting the words off the page, that results with other reading problems. So their reading comprehension may suffer, the development of their vocabulary may suffer as well.
Okay, thank you, Elisar. Okay. All right, so we have a simulation. I really like this video because not only is it a simulation, it is also informative. So while you're watching the video, notice what the letters are doing, what the words are doing, maybe take away 2 things, and then think about those myths that we just encountered. So let me know if you can hear, if you'll just unmute and say, okay, we can hear. I made sure to select the sound. It's just like symphony music. Can you hear it?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so our reflection is, I want to come out of here. It's starting over, give me just a second. So the reflection stem is, what is your physical response to this video, your emotional response, and your cognitive response? So like physically, how did you feel when watching this? Yes, you can definitely, I'll just drop the link in the chat in just a second. Thank you for asking, Tori. What is
before we reflect, can we just solidify the signpost? So we talked a little bit about the definition, and this simulation of dyslexia was really good, but I think we should just identify some signposts.
Yeah. So when I watched this video, I've been tutoring students for 5 years now. Last month made 5 years that I've been working with students, and I have seen all of those things in various students of various age groups as well. All right, so the signpost, Elisar, you want to lead this portion?
Yeah, so again, we talked about the characteristics of dyslexia, both in the definition. You saw a little bit of those characteristics highlighted in the simulation, and we wanted to also just explicitly share with you what you may notice in a child who is dyslexic. And by far, these bullets are not an exhaustive list at all, but we just wanted to just provide some context. So remember when we did the myths and the truth game, and one of the passages or one of the questions said we need to wait until 3rd grade to assess a student for dyslexia. And we have so much evidence now that shows that that is actually the opposite of what we should be doing. That is so detrimental to a student's reading development. We can understand in a student as early as preschool if they may be at risk for dyslexia. So what that looks like in a preschool student, think about a little kiddo. They have lots of language. So when we see students who have delayed speech, so they're not able to develop their speech, oral language like we would think, maybe they're 1 year old, 2 years old, and they're just not on track with making the sounds and the words that we expect. That's a signpost. Also, when we have students who are just not interested in rhyming. So if you think about a lot of the nursery rhymes that students either have read to them or they listen to or they sing, if we see that they're not interested in that, they're not able to make rhymes, that's a sign. Or if they are 3 years old, 4 years old, and they're still talking baby talk, they're not pronouncing words clearly, then that would also be a signpost. When students move out of that preschool age range and they get into kindergarten, 1st grade, we'll start to see that students struggle with segmenting phonemes and very basic words. So Cvc words are words that have the consonant, vowel, consonant pattern. And a lot of times those are the words that we expect students to master very quickly. So if we see kindergarten and 1st grade students who can't take a word like dog and segment the sounds, d, g, then we also know that that is a signpost for dyslexia. If they have difficulty corresponding letters to sounds, if I show them a letter S and they're unable to tell me that it makes the S sound, that may be a sign. When students move beyond 1st grade and they're in 2nd grade or beyond, we'll start to see these signs: slow progress in reading skills. So maybe they're in school, the school is administering an assessment, the teacher sends home a letter and they say, I know your child is in 4th grade, but they're reading on a 2nd grade level. That's slow progress in developing their reading skills. Or if you're reading with your child and they come across words they don't know, you don't see them actively applying a strategy such as decoding or phonics to figure out what that word means. If they come across a multi-syllabic word, which is just a very long word, such as transcendentalism, you don't see that they have a strategy to break that word down into parts. They're trying to sound it out sound by sound. Other signs are just students reading laboriously. So if you notice that they're reading a text and it's like a struggle, they're spending so much of their brain resources on just lifting the words from the page, that's another example of maybe the student may have dyslexia.
All right, so while it's still kind of fresh, I want to go ahead and just get you to reflect on the video as well as those myths and those truths. I've already heard a little bit of reflection from Tori in the chat box. She shared just understanding more of what her daughter may be experiencing. So thank you for sharing that, Tori. So you can unmute or you can put it in the chat box, whatever feels most comfortable for you. But from the myths and the truth activity and watching the simulation, what is your physical, emotional, and cognitive response?
Why can't school see it? That's my response.
Mm-hmm.
Fighting it so hard. And why don't they touch the right areas either? But
I really appreciate that honest and authentic reaction because we feel the same way. And we'll get into that a little bit in our next session or next portion of this session. But I'm sure you know that the new Senate bill is going to drive forward schools knowing what to do.
Yeah. And that's the work that Tina is all about. So I'm glad that Tina and others are doing that work to make sure that we don't have this huge inequity in our schools where we know what is best for students, but we just don't implement it. So I'm gonna, anyone else emotionally, how did you feel? Well, I definitely heard the emotion from Tori. What about cognitively? How did you feel when you were looking at the dyslexia simulation? All right, so I'll just step in on that piece. So when I saw one of the sentences said, we have difficulty reading, I noticed how they spell difficulty. And honestly, phonetically, that is how you spell that. That word did sound like difficulty. So if I'm really just contending with all of the things, all of the processors, the phonemic awareness, and I'm a student, to me, if I see difficulty spelled with a double E at the end, that looks right to me. But that's when we had the myth and truth about, is English just this crazy language? It's not. There's a rule for why Y makes a long E, but we're expecting students to recall so many of those spelling expectancies, and cognitively, that can be draining.
I'll share an emotional response just really quickly. So one thing that stood out to me in the simulation was the part where it says, are we dumb? Are we stupid? And then it said no. And that had just, I don't know, it honestly just made me sad because there's this myth again that if a child is dyslexic, that they may be dumb or they may be stupid, but it's quite the opposite. And I really love the way Shay Wicks describes it. It's like the child has a sea of strengths. There are so many beautiful things about the child, so many skills and gifts and talents, and even academic success. And in this sea of strengths, here's this little blip that's dyslexic. And I feel like it's really empowering for parents to know that dyslexic students can go on to do wonderful and great things in life and be successful. And the earlier we can identify and label it that the child is dyslexic, it gives some relief, not only to the parents, but to the child, because then they begin to understand, I'm wonderful in all these other areas, but this is how I know, this is how I learned to read, and they can get the support that they need. So for me, it was just an emotional response because I think about the parents and the students who struggle trying to identify what is wrong.
Thank you, Elisar. Okay. All right, so the big concept or takeaway from just the what of dyslexia, we now know that dyslexia is a very common problem. And we'll know even more so once our schools start to actually screen students for dyslexia in beyond the House bill. affecting 1 out of every 5 children, 10 million in America alone. And this comes from Shaywitz, the author of Overcoming Dyslexia. Dyslexia is not diagnosed in most school settings. We just emphasize that the students are not receiving the appropriate interventions. However, I find hope in knowing, and you all got this one correct, that 95% of people can learn to read. So thank you. All right. So what factors make learning how to read a struggle for some children? So earlier, Tina shared that Elisar and I have both become letters trained, which is a program authored by Dr. Louisa Most, one of the leading researchers and thought leaders in literacy. In addition to Dr. Most, Dr. Carol Tolman, the creator of the Hourglass. And so we're going to talk about what about this English language makes reading a struggle. First of all, our brains are not wired to read, only to speak, which is why when a child is 2 or 3, maybe even earlier, 1, these new pandemic babies, they do a lot of things very early now. Babies are saying dad, dad, mama, and because once you hear it enough, you can say it. Reading doesn't work that way. Our brains are not wired in that way. Most people have to actually be taught how to read more explicitly than others. The written language system has not existed long enough for our brains to evolve the functional adaptations and pathways required to read. Only about 10,000 years have we actually had a print system. So in terms of science in our brains, that's pretty recent. Also, the English language is morphophonemic, and Elisar was just talking about the sound of S, but guess what? S also says Z, right?
Right.
And so that makes English a very difficult language, one of the most studied languages in the world. And then I have some examples. So if you look at the word vain, and then you have the word vanity, AI is saying long A, and then the meaning is very similar, but once you change the spelling just a little bit, the vowels do something totally different. Let's look at knife and knives. The F goes to what? A V. Why? Because our mouth really does the same thing to say, right? And then the last one, sleep versus slept. Meaning is the same, part of speech different. So past tense, the E is going to say short E. Current, the E is going to make the long E sound. So this is one of the features that makes the English language a struggle, thus making reading, learning to read a struggle. All right, Elisar, did you want to ask something about the struggle? Any questions about the reading struggle? Any questions about any of these ideas?
I think the only thing that I'll add is just when you were talking about the morphophonemic part or aspect of the English language, I always just think about a conversation that I had with my husband. And so it just shows me how even as educated adults, this is just knowledge that is not common to the lay person. And I just remember we were trying to teach past tense to my son, and we were talking about ED, and I kept telling my husband, no, it makes this sound. And he said, no, it only makes this sound. And I said, listen, ED makes 3 sounds. And so that's a good example of how we're morphophonemic in our language, that even when you think you have the code, that sometimes those 2 letters, they make various sounds.
All right, so I just learned yesterday that CI, if you've had any kind of tutoring with your child or any just working with your child, you know that SH and then TH are digraphs, right? 2 letters that make 1 sound. CI is also a digraph. It says shh. The TI is a digraph too. So like in the word shun, in the word militia, TI is saying shh. So just so many things. Back to that myth question, English is this crazy language. Broad, extensive, deep, yes, but crazy, no. All right, so while there is settled science, and I'm kind of gonna definitely want Tori to tap in on this, while there is settled science dating back decades that informs of the most effective methods for teaching reading. However, today, many researchers in the field continue to disagree on the methods and resources. Tori said early, why don't schools just get it? Why don't they just make it happen for our kids, right? It seems easy. However, if you are an educator and you've ever worked in early or secondary education, you will probably say, no one ever taught me how to teach a kid to read. All right. And so there's an article that recently came out in AJC, and you can just in the chat box or raise your hand if you had an opportunity to read this article. If you haven't, I will drop this link as well as the YouTube link in before the end of the night. This is a really quick read, and it just really tells the story of what's going on right here locally in Atlanta. So while the Reading Wars is a national thing, this is local. They're going to mention Marietta City Schools, Fulton County Schools, and the work that they're doing to make sure that they don't have this inequity and that they're actually using research-based, deeply rooted in the science of reading practices to teach kids how to read. Anyone have a kid in Marietta or Fulton County? Okay. All right, so let's talk about what some schools are still doing and what kind of defies the science of reading. So there's this approach called balanced literacy, and it's where you'll see in the examples on the right side, where if a student is encountering a word, they may be prompted to guess. The teacher may say, what do you think will make sense right there, right? That's one thing that occurs. Another thing is the teacher doesn't really have a system for teaching the English sounds, teaching the 44 phonemes, teaching digraphs. It's just kind of unplanned. Then there's a 3 cueing system in word decoding. And we kind of already mentioned students being prompted to guess, even to rely on the pictures to be able to make a prediction about what that word is. And these are things we just don't want students doing, because as the text become more complex, this is just unreliable.
And I'll just jump in and just share, if you do a really quick search on YouTube for the Purple Challenge, and if I can, I'll link that into our chat box. It really explains why structured literacy is the best approach for teaching reading versus balanced literacy that relies on a 3 cueing system. Essentially, in the video, it's a little girl, she's reading a book about painting a purple fence. And when her mother shows her the book with all the pictures, she's able to read all these words, such as purple and other words. But then when the pictures disappear, words that the child read over and over again, she no longer can decode those words and say those words because the cues were not there. And so it just really shows the difference between actual reading and guessing based on context or based on pictures. It also shows that even though the pictures were gone, and the child had not learned the word, she also did not have a strategy. She didn't know how to use phonics skills to sound out the words. So it was very interesting.
All right, thank you, Elisar, for mentioning the Purple Challenge. So that's an additional resource. It looks like someone in the chat has already watched the Purple Challenge. What is kind of interesting about the Purple Challenge is the sarcasm in the mom's voice. When she takes it away, she says, oh my God, you have to watch it. So we need to share the Purple Challenge as well as the AJC article. So lots of great resources we'll share tonight. All right, so I heard someone say my child definitely did not have structured literacy. Let's look at some of the essential components of structured literacy. If you look at the ladder of reading, you'll notice at the bottom where it says 10 to 15% for students with dyslexia, they'll learn to read. It requires a code-based, explicit, systematic, sequential. So if you have a child with dyslexia in a public school system, you should ask the educators, is this program explicit, systematic, sequential, and diagnostic? Does it possess these features? Let's shift to the right a little bit. When students have structured literacy, they're going to learn how to manipulate the sounds within words. This is going to result in significantly less guessing. They're going to learn letter sounds and patterns. For example, I was just saying, I just learned a new digraph. They're going to learn the vowel teams. They're going to learn about bossy R. They're going to learn those things in a very explicit way. In terms of fluency, they're going to have frequent opportunities to read and reread orally, but not just because students will say, I can read. And yes, many students can just read and shoot right across the page. And then when they finish, you say, what was this about? And oftentimes for word callers, you'll get nothing, or they'll say, I don't know, or they'll inaccurately recall the facts of the text that they just read. So not just reading and strong oral fluency, but automaticity, reading with expression, and reading that demonstrates I read it and I understood it. And you'll be able to kind of gauge if they're understanding it by the way that they phrase and chunk sentences. Where do they insert expression in the sentence? And that's one way to be able to determine if fluency is occurring. And then lastly, a program rooted in structured literacy is going to focus on root words, prefixes, suffixes in the oral and written language. Any questions about structured literacy?
I just want to jump in and just emphasize the graphic. So Nancy Young put this graphic together, and we really love it because we know that there are some students who can learn how to read without explicit systematic instruction. But if you look at this graphic, it really gives you the numbers behind that. So it says that 10 to 15%, those who are dyslexic, they learn to read. Learning to read requires code-based, explicit, systematic, sequential diagnostic instruction with many repetitions. And then when you move up the ladder, 40 to 50% of students learning to read proficiently requires, again, code-based, explicit, systematic, and sequential instruction without the necessity of the intensive repetition. Then 35% learn to read based on broad instruction. So that might be the 3Qing or balanced literacy. And then 5% learn to read seamlessly or effortlessly. What I really like is that at the top of the ladder where we have 40% who can learn how to read without structured literacy, notice how on the side it says those students are still advantaged by a structured literacy approach. So that means it's good for all. And so that's really what we want to impress upon with our teachers and our schools, that why not just get the 95% of students reading by using an approach that works for all students?
Yeah, thank you for expanding on that thought about, so we referenced Shaywitz, we've referenced letters, we've referenced structured literacy. This approach, so everyone may not have a diagnosis of dyslexia. Every child may not be able to be screened for it. But what we do know is what works for teaching students with dyslexia how to read will work for all students. So just know that, because maybe you're here tonight and your child doesn't have a diagnosis of dyslexia. All right, so this research, these two models drive much of structured literacy. And so if you look at the top part, I really like it because it's very simple math. Word recognition times language comprehension equals reading comprehension. And so essentially what this first model means is that if I am strong in word recognition, but I have zero language comprehension, 1 times 0 is still 0. So my reading comprehension would still not be strong. So what needs to happen in a classroom for students is that teachers are giving instruction that strengthens word recognition and strengthens language comprehension so that we have the outcome of strong reading comprehension. So if you look at the second model, you take that blue block at the bottom where it says word recognition, you'll see the subcomponents of word recognition: phonological awareness, decoding and spelling, and sight recognition. That represents that blue block. Language comprehension, you have those 5 skills under language comprehension. And so what this shows is that in order to have a skilled reader, students must have all of these things. So the curriculum should have all of these things. The teacher should be equipped to build all of these skills, thus resulting in building stronger readers. Any questions about the simple view of reading or Scarborough's rope? Is this new to anyone?
My situation, past elementary school, it's really hard to get the schools to see that basic reading skills are still in play, and deficits in those basic reading skills play out in reading comprehension. They only want to look at the reading comprehension, and I was even told that it was the only part of reading that's important. And I was like, no, it's not. All of
What
it is.
grade? What grade? I'm sorry.
Eighth
Eighth
grade.
Okay. So
I can
we
see
didn't really,
why
go ahead,
that.
Elisar.
I was just going to say, I could see why they would say that, because when students are in grades K through 2, the primary focus is on teaching students how to read. And then when they shift from 2nd grade to 3rd grade, the focus shifts. So now I'm no longer focusing on teaching you how to read, but now I'm teaching you how to learn through your reading. And the myth, though, is that just because I'm in 8th grade, 3rd grade, 12th grade, 11th grade, is that I don't need those foundational skills. And those students certainly do. So if they have matriculated through elementary school, they're up into secondary school, and they don't have basic foundational reading skills, you can't just teach on top of deficits. And so teachers have to do both simultaneously. And that's why I like the simple view of reading so much, because it shows that both are important. And I think that's probably a misunderstanding why they said that.
I'm not sure which participant that was, but ironically, this is the work that we do every day. So in my district, I'm a secondary reading intervention, and it's reading interventionist, and it kind of sounds like an oxymoron because that's grades 6 through 12 reading intervention. So no one can tell Elisar or I that there are secondary students that are not struggling with foundational literacy skills. We have been working for the last couple of weeks trying to find an intervention most appropriate for secondary striving readers. So it's unfortunate that that message is being communicated to you. There are definitely tons of research to show that there are too many striving secondary readers, especially in the state of Georgia. Okay, so
I'll jump in, Ebony.
Go ahead.
Okay, so of course, this section is just all about why is it a struggle with reading. And so we talked a little bit about the brain and how the brain works, and that it not ever being wired to learn how to read. So it's not natural for us. We've talked a little bit about the reading war. So all of this conflicting research and all of our researchers saying this and saying that is very confusing for teachers. And many of them have not received education in their education about reading in their educational programs. But we just want to share a few more barriers that educators face that also complicate this thing. And so one thing is teaching grade level content is a priority. So we have competing priorities. That's just the honest truth. So we know that we have students who are sitting in classrooms at the end of the year. They are required, depending on their grade level, 3rd grade on up, to sit for a state summative assessment. And our teachers are really heavily focused on that bottom line. And so the time that it takes to provide intensive instruction that students need if they're striving readers, it just honestly doesn't exist in the schools. Another thing is that the professional development that is required, it doesn't necessarily target our students with the greatest needs. So for example, we mentioned to you letters training. And so letters is a wonderful training. And a lot of times it's concentrated and focused on our elementary teachers, but our secondary teachers don't necessarily have that professional development. And even when they do, they struggle to make connections. It doesn't resonate with them. They don't understand, why do I need this at 6th grade, 10th grade? Because I'm teaching Romeo and Juliet. What do I need a phoneme for? What do I need that for? And then, of course, if any of you have ever worked in a school system, then you know the reality of a teacher's workload. And it's just beyond sometimes what is. It's just insurmountable. It's a Herculean task sometimes to be a teacher. And so the effort, the knowledge, the program, the resources, I would honestly say they lack in a lot of schools, and those barriers prevent educators from being able to really close up the gap. And I will also say that if schools don't have a very strong elementary program, it really is so hard to close gaps. We know from research, Louisa Motes has shared 1 in 8 students have a chance of ever catching up without intensive intervention. As students get older, that intensity is really hard to do at the public school level.
So Elisar has already kind of touched on this point, and I just really like this image. So what I want to say is that for the last year, we have been trying to implement letters at the secondary level, and we've taken several approaches. But when you have a veteran teachers, and you'll see if you get a chance to read that AJC article, the statement about, hey, I've been doing this and I've been doing this for this many years. It's just hard to change the mindset of people and say, I know you've been doing this, but this is the correct way to do it. It's hard to tell someone that, especially, you know, someone who has a master's degree. You can go on endless degrees educators have to get. It's hard to undo their thinking and convince them otherwise. And so that's just kind of where we are in the nation.
Ebony, someone mentioned to me at one time, it was not that long ago, they said, it is not common for teachers to follow through and follow their students along who didn't do well, to check in with their future teachers as to whether or not those students are doing well or not. And you may live in a super small community where you know the kids who were not doing well, but you talk about a major school district, the first grade teacher may not have the slightest idea of what happens to a kid when they're in middle school or high school. They may have no idea. So there's not this looping idea where you're following or tracking the kids who are participating, who are your students.
Absolutely. Not just that, we are in a very transient district where students are moving all the time.
Yeah.
I was working with the literacy specialist this week, and he wanted to look at historical data for a student. The student came from another state. We don't have any data. And so by the time the student is identified, they're moving again. And so there are just a lot of barriers in the public education system. Elisar, are you going to take this?
Yeah, so this section really was here just to really help you all understand why teaching reading, learning how to read is a struggle. And so we gave you just a variety of factors to consider. So considering our biology, considering how teachers are prepared when they are in graduate school or undergraduate school, developing their skills to become a teacher, and also just understanding the realities that public school teachers face. But we don't want to end on such a negative note. We want to give hope. And so if you are an advocate, a parent, or someone who has been just in this world for any amount of time, then you probably are already aware that there is a national push to ensure that all educators are equipped with the science of reading. And they not only have that knowledge, but they also know how to practically apply it to the classroom, which is the structured literacy that we talked about. Even in our state of Georgia, there's hope coming. The process has already started. We have a Senate bill that has been passed that mandates all schools to screen students for dyslexia at the elementary level. So that is wonderful news that we are extremely excited about. And what's already happening in the background is that we have some districts who are piloting that screening process. So they're going through the process, they're working out the kinks, and all schools, I think it's 24, 25, will start that screening process. All right, so now what we want to do is just equip you with some tips that you can implement if you are at home working with your child. All right, so we say that we should take a very intensive approach. So if you have noticed some of the characteristics that we mentioned earlier, those signposts that really indicate whether or not a child could be at risk for dyslexia, the worst thing that you can do is wait. And so you can always tell a teacher or a school that is really not knowledgeable about the science or the sciences of reading when they give you that, oh, he'll grow out of it. Well, just give it some time. He's not caught up right now, but he will be. So those are red flags that they're not quite understanding of the science of reading. And so that means that you have to take action. And our suggestion is that you take a 3-part approach. You try to partner with your school as much as possible, be an advocate for your child. Even if you are a parent and your child, and you might feel intimidated. Some of our parents feel intimidated because they haven't gone to school to be educators, even if they are a degreed professional. This world of reading sometimes can be very complex and very hard to navigate, but you want to do your best to advocate for your child as much as possible. In addition to navigating, is in addition to advocating for your child, you also want to partner as much as possible with your school. And we'll share with you some things that you can do to forge that partnership. Also, there's some things that you can do at home. So we know that there's all kind of data that says students should read 20 minutes a day. So we'll talk to you a little bit about what that reading time should look like so that it's effective. And then we'll also share with you when you should tap into other resources such as tutors. All right, Ebony. All right, so we have created a checklist for parents, and it's really a checklist that gives parents, again, not an exhaustive list, but it's a jumping pad just to get your juices flowing, just thinking about some things. So the first thing, it just helps you to identify signs. And since we've already talked about that tonight, I'm not going to talk again about recognizing those signs. But if you're reading with your child and you notice that your child is skipping words, guessing at words, reading laboriously, then you know that, okay, maybe I need to schedule a conference with the teacher. But some things you want to do when you schedule a conference with the teacher is to ask some really good questions to kind of get down to, how is my child being taught to read? And what you're trying to decipher is, are they using a code-based, text-based, structured literacy infused program that is based on phonics, but not just phonics, really the 5 components of reading. So students are going to learn and develop their phonemic awareness skills, their phonics skills, fluency, and they're not waiting until kids get to 3rd grade, but even in K1 and 2, they are developing their vocabulary and comprehension skills simultaneously. So you want to ask, what are the grade level reading expectations? So what should my child be able to do at this grade? And how is my child currently performing, so that you can identify where your child is on the continuum. You also want the teacher to be able to tell you what specifically are the strengths. And any type of diagnostic test that teachers are administering to the children, so if they're taking a MAP assessment, if they're taking an iReady assessment, they should be able to tell you specifically, where are my students' strengths, or where are my child's strengths, but also what are the deficits, so that you know specifically what your child should be working on. Also, they should be able to tell you how they are supporting your child at school. So many elementary schools, they have the general everyday reading class. This is whole group instruction, but each child, especially at elementary, should be participating in small group instruction. And that small group instruction should be an opportunity for your child to receive personalized instruction. And that doesn't just mean that if my child is struggling, that also means that if your child is ready for more rigorous work, that in that small group setting, your child is being stretched as well. And so those are some of the questions that you can ask. So what are the grade level reading expectations? So what should a kindergartner be able to do? What should a 1st grader be able to do? Where is my child on that continuum? What are her strengths? What are her weaknesses? What are you doing in school to support my child? What curriculum is being used? It should not be the same curriculum if your child has a reading deficit that they're using in whole group. It should be a totally different program that addresses that specific need. So if your child is showing that they have a deficit in phonics, the curriculum should be a phonics-based program. If they have a deficit in phonemic awareness, they should be working on phonemic awareness. A lot of times, teachers will pull children during WIN time or small group time, and they'll focus on vocabulary and comprehension, but the child actually has a deficit in phonemic awareness. So we just want to make sure that the diagnostic reveals some deficits and that the prescription, like we like to say, matches what the ailment is. And finally, you want to ask what resources are available to you to use at home. So a lot of school districts purchase programs that support reading instruction. And many of these programs are web-based or internet-based programs, and they can be used at home, such as iReady or other programs. And so you want to just know, what does my child have access to? Is it Smarty Ants? Is it Achieve 3000? And how can I utilize this at home to strengthen what I do here? We also, in addition to the questions, we want to just share some actions. We talked a little bit earlier about how it can be demoralizing, frustrating. It could just really give you the blues if you're having this experience with your child. And we want you to know that support is available. So even as you are simultaneously trying to partner with your school, you also want to just look for support groups, look for other parents or organizations so that you can continue to develop your knowledge.
You good, Elisar?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Did you touch on the 20 minutes a day?
I was going to on the next slide.
Okay.
All right, so we talked about how we can partner with schools, but now I want to talk to you about 3 things that you can do at home. And so one thing that you all probably realize is that teaching reading and learning about the science of reading, it can be confusing. It is a lot of information, a lot of technical language, and the layperson often lacks the understandability to be able to practically apply it. We also notice that a lot of parents, a lot of people, they struggle with even producing sounds on their own. And so what we endeavor to share with you now are just practical things that you truly can do with your child at home that are easily implemented. So the first thing is paired reading. So again, we've heard about the 8 million words, and just I'm sure that many of you have heard about the Matthew effect. But if you haven't, I just want to share with you really quickly what that means. So the Matthew effect in the reading world really just means that the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. If you all remember that from your Bible, then you'll just understand that there's a reciprocal nature, that if a child is reading, then the more they read, the more words they gain, the more background knowledge they gain, which gives them an enjoyable, pleasant experience with reading, and it makes them want to read more. Again, the more they read, the more words and world knowledge they gain. And so it's just that cyclical nature. And so we often really pump and emphasize, read 20 minutes a day with your child. But a lot of times parents don't understand what that 20 minutes should look like. So paired reading is one of those things that parents can do with their children easily. It takes about 15 to 20 minutes to do a night. And it really is very beneficial for both parents and for the child. And what it looks like is the parent picking a text for the child. And it really should be a text that most of the words the child could decode. And first, the parent serves as a model. He or she is going to read the text, and not just read it, but read it with the correct intonation, read it with the correct emphasis and expression and fluency to really make it an enjoyable experience for the child. After the parent reads the book independently while the child is watching, both parent and child will read the book together. This is what we call choral reading. We're reading it together. Again, The inflections are there, intonation is there, expression is there. After the parent and the child does a shared oral reading, then it shifts to independent reading of the child. Again, the child is reading the same book. And when the child reads, we expect that the child will have accuracy when they read words, fluency when they read words. So the accuracy, the automaticity is there. We also expect that the child is going to read with the same expression that he or she read with the parent. When the child comes across a word that they don't know, we pause, we give them some time to try to figure out the word. If they don't have the word, we give them the word. They continue to read. This is repeated readings, which we know builds fluency, that's evidence-based. And really focusing on fluency is one of the number one things that parents can do. If children can fluently read, that means that their brain power is freed up to focus on comprehending the text and pulling the vocabulary from the text. And so paired reading is one of those things that can easily be done. I just described it for you, but as always, you can do a Google search or YouTube search and find an example of it. Another thing that parents can do at home is intentionally build vocabulary. And this is so important because oral language has a strong correlation on reading comprehension. There are a lot of words that if students hear just spoken out in the world, when they come to a passage and see that word, they have some context, some reference to that word, and they're more likely to pull that word from the page and even understand what it means because it's a part of their oral vocabulary, their listening vocabulary. So what are some ways that you can intentionally build your vocabulary with your child? I just think about just a day out with my son at the grocery store. There are so many opportunities for me to teach him vocabulary. One thing that my son loves to do is pull the fruit and eat it before we get home. And so I'm constantly telling him, I'm not going to let you eat dirty grapes. They're one of the dirtiest fruits, but he can't wait. That's an opportunity for me to teach my son words such as organic, pesticides. So knowing that I could take an everyday shopping trip and give my son lots of language and lots of vocabulary terms really translates to any time you're communicating with your child. Elevate your language, and that's a way that you're intentionally building your child's vocabulary. Just building their awareness of words as you're driving down the street and you notice words, as you're sitting on your couch watching TV and you hear words on TV, you point them out. So it's really just building your child's awareness of words and building their vocabulary. Another way to build vocabulary is always choosing texts that are going to stretch your child. So we don't want to keep our kids in decodables. We definitely don't want our kids in level reader. In level readers, we want our kids to be reading books that they're interested in, as well as books that have that rich vocabulary, rich sentence structures, as well as these wonderful, beautiful ideas, because that is how students gain more words. And if we keep them in level readers, then we don't give them the opportunity to really develop the words like we want them to. And then of course, with the daily reading, of course, you can do the pair reading, but what you want to do is end that pair reading with discussion. So it's always important to talk about what happened in the book. Who were the characters in the book? Well, what do you think the author's message was? How does this book compare to a book that we read last night? What did you learn about organic fruits and vegetables in this book? So it's really just engaging your child in a discussion to ensure that they're comprehending the text. Ebony. All right. And then on our website, we have a blog that we've written that really outlines how do you know if you should hire a tutor. And essentially, we have written that blog based on these three principles. That number one, the science of reading is complex. We've only scratched the surface here tonight, but it's really, really complex. And so if you are a doctor, an engineer, or a lawyer, or a teacher, or a nurse, you will know that the science of reading may not necessarily be your wheelhouse. And so because there's a sense of urgency, if your child has a reading deficit, you don't have time to waste and you don't have time to try to figure it out. You want to rapidly give them the intensive intervention that they need to really close up the gap. So that's one thing that you want to consider if you have a child who's struggling with reading. Do I have the time? Do I have the knowledge? And do I have the expertise to really help my child reverse poor reading? And so we invite you, we'll put it in the chat box, and we just invite you to check out our blog to learn more about if you should or shouldn't hire a tutor. All right, so ultimately with this last section, what we endeavored to do was just really impress upon you that waiting is not the answer. When you wait for a striving reader to catch up in reading, you're doing your child a huge disservice to their reading development. So if you suspect that your child is having a reading problem, you must act now. And I'll always encourage you to start at the school level and learn about the curriculum that they're using, as well as the approach and practices, and also to get those early reports to really get an understanding of how your child is performing.
We've used so many science of reading terms tonight. I know if you are new to the science of reading, we even have educators like, hold up, wait a minute. What is phonology? What is a grapheme? What is a four-part process or simple view of reading? So much tonight. So what we will share is one lucky person will receive a copy of Shaywit's Overcoming Dyslexia. Elisar and I recently completed our dyslexia endorsement here in Georgia. And one of the books that we referenced closely, we leaned on it throughout the 3 courses, was this book. If you've never learned anything about dyslexia, this is and I mean, obviously we get no endorsements or anything for this, but if I were a parent or a teacher or what have you, this book would equip me with all of the things that I need to better understand what is my child experiencing. And earlier we said physically, emotionally, cognitive. Shaywitz walks you through that. She shares so many stories. I think I have at least one parent in here that has began to read this book. Maya, do you mind sharing one of your takeaways from Shaywitz? She may be doing dinner or something, I don't know.
Oh, no, I'm sorry, I'm here. Well, I've only gotten through the first chapter, and I can't emotionally say how I'm feeling, but it's opening up my eyes a little bit more. Just even, I don't know if y'all gonna open up for like questions and so forth and feedback, but even just going through this training, like right now, is just like, okay, wow. As a parent and then as an educator, I'm like, well, what else can I possibly, what else do I need to do? So, but it's a good read so far, and I'm a reader that I want to read it through, but I literally have to stop.
Yeah, this is one that I would not get on Kindle or anything, because you want to be able to write in it. And so congratulations to Brandy. She was our first place winner in the Myths versus Truths tonight. And so Brandy, if you will send us your email address, we will send you the copy of, we'll connect so that you can get your copy of Overcoming Dyslexia. So thank you, Maya, for sharing your experience with this, not with this text. There are other books. I recently saw a new book, and I think it is Adulting with Dyslexia. And so just thinking about, are you familiar with it, Tina? Yeah, so if you'll put the title in, that's one that I definitely want to purchase. So we've shared so many things tonight. Now we want to kind of hear from you. I know that we got started a little late because we had a hiccup with the link, but we really want to thank you for your time. It's Thursday. It's almost at the end of the week. It is kind of late. I know that you all have children and other things to do, so we really appreciate you Elisar, did you want to close out before we take any Q&A?
Yeah, we can just open for Q&A.
Okay.
Yeah.
So please unmute. I'm trying to do the chat box. I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen so that I can connect a little bit more. All right. Are there any resources that we shared tonight that you would like to have?
I think I put most of them in the chat.
Okay, good. All right. I would start with the purple challenge. I would start there if you've not seen that video.
Can y'all send out a follow-up email or whatever with some of those links? I've been trying to get my kids ready for bed and shuffled around and stuff for this weekend.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we can get the emails from Tina.
Awesome. Someone mentioned an author, Kelly Sandman Hurley, The Adulting with Dyslexia, but she also has a dyslexia advocate book, How to Advocate for Your Child with Dyslexia Within the Public Education System, that I've been reading. And that's another good one by her.
Thank you for sharing. Okay. So I think we recently did the Dyslexia 5K, which is how we reconnected with Tina back in October. And we were talking to a parent in Fulton County. She pulled her child out and put them in Atlanta Speech School, one of those specialized schools. And the conversation that she had with us was, I am a taxpayer. I really don't want to pay this expensive tuition for these schools, but Fulton County has to get it together, or Clayton County has to get it together. And so now I'm gonna stop recording.